when they were shown graphic photos of Liebeck's legs.
An 81-year-old woman has been awarded $2.9 million after she sued McDonald's, claiming their coffee was too hot.
The public perception of it is Stella Liebeck won a lottery. She bought the coffee, she spilled it on herself, and now look, she's a millionaire. When of course the facts are much more complicated than that.
I know what you're thinking. Like, how does someone spill coffee on themselves and it turns into all this? But cases like this don't get this far unless there's more going on, especially when it reaches a courtroom.
Stella Liebeck was a 79-year-old widow sitting in the passenger seat of a parked car when she was burned on February 27, 1992. She had recently quit her job as a department store clerk and moved to Albuquerque to be near her daughter.
The day that the burns happened, my mother and my nephew went through the drive-thru at McDonald's and got breakfast and coffee. And they pulled into the parking lot, and in the Ford Probe, there's slanted surfaces everywhere. There's no place to put the coffee.
You probably didn't even catch that part, but look at the setup she's describing. There's nowhere stable to even put the cup. When everything around you is awkward like that, it only takes one small move for something to go wrong. When something that hot is involved, it usually takes a certain level of care just to handle it safely. And what you're seeing here is a situation where that kind of setup just wasn't really there.
She put it between her knees and lifted the lid off, and in the process of doing that, spilled the coffee, and all of the hot liquid went into the sweatsuit that she was wearing and pooled in the seat.
All I remember is trying to get out of the car. I screamed, not realizing I was burned that bad. I knew I was in terrible pain.
Think about being stuck in that seat for a second, trying to move while something burning is already on you and your body hasn't even processed it yet. In a space that tight, you're not calmly getting out. You're scrambling, twisting, trying anything to get away while the pain is hitting all at once.
The severity of the burns caused Stella Liebeck to go into shock, and her grandson immediately took her to the emergency room.
She was burned over 16% of her body. 6% of the burns were third degree. She was in the hospital for a week.
Medical bills were $10,000. So Stella reached out to McDonald's and asked to be reimbursed.
Burns come in levels. First degree is that quick sting, like a sunburn. Second degree starts blistering and feels way deeper. But third degree is where it goes all the way through the skin. That's the part people miss, because at that level, it's not just, ouch, get this off me. It's damage so deep, your body can't fix it on its own. And this is where it hits different for you watching, because once it gets that serious, it's not one visit and you're done. It turns into hospital time, procedures, follow-ups, all stacking on top of each other. And that's how something like this turns into thousands before you even realize it.
We couldn't believe that this could happen over spilling the coffee. We wrote a letter to McDonald's asking them to check the temperature of the coffee and to give recompense for the medical bills. And the response from McDonald's was an offer of $800.
Stella Liebeck had never sued anyone before Albuquerque attorney Ken Wagner took her case. Before they went to trial, they tried twice to settle out of court, but McDonald's refused.
Let me ask you this. If you're at McDonald's and the first thing you hear is someone had hot coffee spill on them, and now there's a request to cover medical bills, wouldn't your first reaction be like, how is this on us if it was an accident? From that angle, it doesn't immediately sound like a serious case. It sounds like something that shouldn't have escalated that far.
I was not in it for the money. I was in it because I wanted to bring the temperature down so that other people would not go through the same thing I did.
McDonald's policy was to serve coffee between 180 and 190 degrees. A burn expert testified that liquid at 180 degrees could cause third-degree burns within 15 seconds.
Regular coffee usually sits around 130 to 160 degrees, which is already hot enough that if you dipped your finger in, you'd pull out fast and feel that sting. But this was pushing close to 180, 190, and that gap might not sound huge, but it's the difference between pulling away with pain and pulling away with your skin already burned. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't even want to drink coffee that hot. That's past enjoying it at that point. And when something's set up like that at a company's level, it's usually not by accident. There's a reason behind it somewhere.
Lawyers produced documents that showed that between 1983 and 1992, nearly 700 people claimed that they had been burned by hot coffee at McDonald's. An expert for McDonald's testified that burns are exceedingly rare, 1 for every 24 million cups of coffee served.
They just said it's statistically insignificant, and we're not going to change what we do.
What they're doing is comparing the people who got hurt to the millions who didn't, and using that to say it's not a real problem. So because most customers were fine, the ones who are actually burned get treated like they don't matter. And that's where that logic starts to break down.
People interact with hot beverages all the time in a fast food restaurant, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the restaurant is doing something wrong.
Attorney Tracy Jenks tried the case for McDonald's and argued that Liebeck bore personal responsibility because she spilled the coffee on herself, and McDonald's coffee wasn't any hotter than the coffee at other fast food restaurants.
No lie, guys, she only has a point because nobody in that moment is out here measuring every other company's coffee to compare it. It sounds solid on the surface, but it's really leaning on the fact that nobody's actually checking. But that still doesn't make it right because everybody does it. Doesn't suddenly make something safe. If something can seriously hurt people, it doesn't matter how common it is. That way of thinking doesn't make sense.
But the jury saw how liquid at that temperature can scald when they were shown graphic photos of Liebeck's legs and burned groin.
The photos depicted where they had to graft the skin from the side of her legs to close the third-degree burn, and I think if people would have seen the severity of the burns, they would have realized it was not a laughing matter.
What people don't realize is injuries like that don't just look bad. They change how your body functions after. When burns go that deep, it's not just healing. It's rebuilding the skin, dealing with nerve damage, and living with that long after the moment is over.
After 7 days of testimony and 4 hours of deliberation, jurors unanimously agreed to award Stella $200,000 in compensatory damages. But because she caused the spill, they reduced that to $160,000. Jurors then set punitive damages to send the message to McDonald's to turn down the temperature of the coffee. They based the amount on the revenue from 2 days of coffee sales, $2.7 million.
Don't look at me. I don't even know why they have it that hot in the first place. Like at some point, you gotta expect if it's that extreme, somebody's gonna get hurt eventually. From a business standpoint, keeping it that hot means coffee stays fresh longer after it's served, especially for people taking it on the go. That way they remake it less and waste less. And in the end, it saves the company money while still feeling hot to the customer.
Instead of pointing out she spilled the coffee in the passenger seat of a parked car, this was the new narrative.
It seems she was holding a cup between her legs while driving.
Clamped it between her legs, drove down the street, spilled it, burned herself, sued McDonald's, and collected.
Stella has received letters saying stuff like,
I was driving down the road. I had no business driving down the road with coffee between my legs and all that stuff.
My mother was made the villain in this story. It's like bullying. It feels like bullying.
You see how fast that flips? People run with the version that's easiest to judge. And once that spreads, it turns into everyone piling on. Because blaming one person is just easier than slowing down and really thinking it through.
Once everybody decides what is true about something and the media has been sort of an echo chamber for it, then how do you deal with the fact that they might be wrong?
Now she claims she broke her nose on the sneeze guard at the Sizzler, bending over looking at the chickpeas.
Ooh, my coffee was too hot. It's coffee!
You're not alone. I hear it too. How they're saying it now, it's like a joke. Like none of what actually happened even matters anymore. And that's the part that hits. Because once it gets turned into something to laugh at, people stop caring about what she actually went through. Look at me. Does it look like I'm laughing? I'm not. Because that's not something you laugh at. That's somebody really getting hurt. Even if you don't fully get it, that's still real pain.
Stella's portrayal as a scheming wannabe millionaire was based on the jury's award. But that amount was only a suggestion. In reality, the judge significantly reduced the punitive damages.
The judge reduced the award to about $650,000.
According to a source familiar with the case, it was settled for less than $500,000. Stella was not allowed to talk to the press.
You see a number like that and it shifts everything. Because money like that makes people jealous, whether they admit it or not. And once that kicks in, people start assuming she's trying to come up instead of actually looking at what happened.
Popular misunderstanding of the case is so ingrained that that even the legal system has had to learn to grapple with it. In 2011, the Utah Supreme Court ordered a personal injury case retried out of concern that the defense attorney might have tainted the jury's decision by comparing the case to Liebeck's. Meanwhile, courtroom attorneys across the country now use the case to screen potential jurors.
That's what makes it crazy, because how you react to a case like that shows how you're gonna look at the next one. Like if someone hears about that coffee case and calls it stupid without really knowing the details, you already know how they're about to misjudge things going forward. And once someone's already judging like that, it's hard for them to stay fair without even realizing it. So it's not just about the case, it's about the mindset they're bringing in.
It's a wonderful litmus test. If you're putting someone on a jury, you really have to know how they feel about this case to know whether they are open to the facts that you're going to present. McDonald's has been in the public mind cast as the victim. That Stella Liebeck needed to defend her reputation is the saddest piece of this whole story to me.
McDonald's representatives didn't return emails or calls, but according to franchisee handbooks, coffee must now be held and served 10 degrees lower.
And that's how companies move, because the change usually doesn't start happening until it starts costing them. It's not about one person, it's about profits and the business once something hits hard enough to force them to adjust.